I'm just building a knee wall, and there's a line here that runs the full length down. So obviously the first thing I did was measure the specific location for my knee wall, and you got to do that once, then do it again, make sure you got it right. The second thing is to install my base plates, and the base plates are the straightest long 2x4s you can get, and you can see that I tucked those up right against my line, screwed them down on one end, then on the other, just to make sure that they match up with that line. And these are long construction screws. I think they're like 4 inches. And each one of these screws hits one of the joists down below. So I've got some floorboards here, but the goal is not to attach these to the 3/4 inch floorboards, but instead the much more burly, beefy structural members down below the floor joists. All right, so then I needed a top plate, and I ripped my top plate using my circular saw. You could also rip it on a table saw, but basically what you're doing is you're putting a bevel on it. You're putting an angle on one edge. That way it's going to follow the pitch of your roof, but at the corner, it's not going to interfere with the edge of your wall. Anyway, that's going to make sense in a minute when you take a look at this, but basically when you put your top plate in, just bevel that thing, rip it on your table saw or with a circular saw, and you're going to avoid yourself some headaches down the road. Similarly, the top plate, just like with the base plate, is attached to the rafters. All right, let's just talk a little bit about the components of this knee wall. It's pretty straightforward, but you don't want to miss one of these guys. Basically, you've got a base plate, and I just lined that up with a string, measured out to exactly my place that I wanted it. And your knee wall is probably shorter than this one. The reason this one's so tall is just because this way this building is configured. These floor joists are not tied in right here, but instead tied in about 3 feet below that. So anyway, you got the base plate. The base plate is a straight up 2x4 fixed to the floor. And then this is a pretty critical piece. I've got a level line coming up to the edge of the knee wall. If you just put a straight up 2x4 on here, it's going to be angled out and you're not going to get a really good connection. So this guy is ripped, and I just ripped it using a circular saw. You could rip it on a table saw, but that way you have this angle which will allow you to put your wall board, if it's like drywall, in this case it's 1/2 inch plywood. This angle will allow you to put that drywall nice and flat, or that wall board nice and flat. So this piece is ripped. This is kind of like a top plate. It's just an angled top plate. And in this case, this angle is, I think it was 34 degrees. And these are the vertical framing members. In your case, you're probably doing them on 16-inch centers. This structure just happens to be built on 22s. Go figure. Anyway, these guys are also angled, so you get a nice flush cut right here. And they're just put in like traditional framing. So, toenail here, toenail there. You want to measure these guys one by one. It's possible that you have a little bit of bow or variation in your trusses. So in this case, these guys are like a 1/4 inch longer down here than these ones are down here. So I'm just measuring them one by one. And, as you put them in, make sure they're nice and level and plumb and true and everything. So you have a nice flat level face for your wallboard and probably your doors if you're going to use some storage back in here. So you'll see that when I'm putting these studs in place, I'm actually pre-drilling them on the bottom and then screwing them in with construction screws. That is just the way that I do it. It avoids any cracking in the studs. You could, of course, just nail them in place. And this is just to show you that I set up the cutting station for this knee wall up in the attic, right next to the knee wall. And that is because a while back I installed some knee walls in an attic, and it was a really tight attic, and I had to put my cutting station out in the driveway. And man, I was carrying up, one piece at a time pretty much to build that knee wall. That is because all of these members, all these studs are slightly different lengths. This roof is 80 years old, maybe 90 years old, and it's got some variation to it. Even in a new house, even in a house built in the last 5-10 years, if you want to build your knee wall really specifically, you're going to find that there's some variation, and you're going to have to cut each piece to fit. Now this is like the smallest of details, but worth mentioning, I cut these vertical dudes just like maybe a 1/16 of an inch too long, maybe less. So it's not quite a perfect fit there. You know, you want that to be flush. What you see is when I actually fix this guy with my screw, I'm gonna put my shoulder into it and just get a little bit of lift on this guy, just to tension these guys, like preload them just a little bit. Not very much, but just enough that there's some load on the wall and it's not just kind of sitting there loose. All right, so take a look at what happened. Just brought that up, you know, just brought this up just the slightest bit with my shoulder. You could use something else. You could probably use a 2x4, but I just lift them up physically, and that way you get a nice flush connection. And this guy doesn't have a lot of load on it, but it's just preloaded the slightest bit. And if you haven't framed a wall before, a knee wall is really not a bad place to start. The only real differences are that it doesn't have a double stud on the top, like it doesn't have a double top plate, and that these things are short, you know, really short studs go into a knee wall as opposed to, you know, 8, 9, 10 footers. It's easier, I think, to frame a knee wall than it is a full-size wall. But you're also framing it in place. Often if you're building a wall, you're building it on your deck and then raising it up. So you're building it in place, and for that reason, it just takes, you know, a little finesse when you're actually making your connections. Another small point is that this will also stiffen up your studs just a little bit. If you tap them, they're gonna get just a little bit tighter, and you're gonna have that preloaded situation with your knee wall, which I think is a good one. It just creates a little bit of pressure on those studs. And here's just a look at another one where you've got that flush connection. You really need that if you're gonna be putting drywall on here, because you wanna be able to connect the drywall to your stud and to your top plate. In my case, again, plywood, not quite as fussy as drywall. You just benefit from that little smooth fit there. And this is the last or next to last stud going in the knee wall. In almost all situations, if you're building a knee wall in an attic, you're going to be building 2 of them, probably 2 matching knee walls. And here is a look at the framing on this knee wall on this side of the structure. And next up is just to sheathe it, you know. Like I said, I'm going to use plywood on this one, and there's going to be some doors. I'll probably have a door every other bay, something like that. So it'll be like door, solid door, something like that, just so that there's access to the storage back behind the wall. All right, but in this attic, you'll see that it's a little unconventional what I'm doing here, but I did build a second knee wall on part of the other wall. This is because on the other side of the attic, over on this side, I was building a climbing gym, like a backyard climbing gym. I don't know if you saw this, but this is just the string line marking out the top of this little knee wall. But this shorter knee wall went in just like the other one. Again, careful measurement, take your time with some pre-drilling, and make sure everything is plumb, level, and true. You know, the thing about a knee wall is that you sort of feel like you're closing up the space. You know, you're bringing that wall closer in, but at the same time, it makes the distance between the floor and the ceiling higher, and it just makes the space more usable. It's very hard to use the edges of these low slung attics. All right, that's it for these knee walls. They're really pretty simple to build. Just take your time with all the steps and it'll turn out just great. You can see this guy is already home to some storage back behind. They do offer storage, but they also kind of close out your room a little bit, you know, make the room a little bit more square and round it out. And they also offer a little structural support, at least in this case. And this second one that I did is now back behind this kind of climbing wall system. So I guess that's just to say that knee walls can take many uses and shapes and all that. Hit me with a comment down below if you have any questions or comments or ideas or whatever, and I'll see you in the next project.